Good evening, everybody. There are actually two Professor Emenyonus here, and one of them is a very close friend of Professor Utomi. I told him he was the person they wanted to be here, but he said he's too close, Pat, to be here. Very pleased for us to have this conversation. Professor Utomi is a name that people recognize and respect in Nigeria and beyond. And I've heard a lot about him from my nephew, but I've also read about him. We've come in contact a few times. And it's important that I make one particular issue clear. We were supposed to have met and discussed. The organizers of this conference told us, they asked us to do that. We did not. And now, it was accidental, but it's really good that we didn't. So that we wouldn't appear to come here to do something that's stage managed. I think we're here to speak naturally. I'm going to make some comments before we begin to indicate why I would say what I would say and why I wouldn't say what I should say at a point in time. But it's really a pleasure to have a presidential candidate here. You know, if we had the kind of this, if we had Pat as the president of Nigeria, and why not? Perhaps some of the things we're talking about today in Nigeria would be things of the past. But in any case, we're here to engage in some kind of conversation to expatiate on some of the things that we've been discussing over the past 2 days, and then more. So, Pat, welcome.
Thank you so very much. Pleased to be here. Well, if I should lead off with a little bit of some of my own Biafra Civil War experience. People often talk about Biafra beginning from the onset of the Civil War. But of course, Biafra started long before the Civil War. I used to live in a town called Buzo in Zamfara State when the pogrom began. I had traveled to Kaduna. I was returning that Sunday of the 30th of May, I believe it was, 1966. And when the train pulled into the station, it was completely deserted. And I was wondering what was going on. I looked across the station, it was open. My father was standing beside his Peugeot 404, carrying a rifle, and looking like I had not seen Rambo then, but with somebody from and he waved me over, and he said, well, there's been rioting. Your mother should be in hospital because her hand was broken when they came into the church at Mass. But we have him at Garba Ushishi's place. Let's go there. Garba Ushishi would become Minister of Information in Nigeria many years after. But he was manager of Barclays Bank then in Guzo. He was a family friend. And so my father worked for British Petroleum. And he was responsible for the tank farm there and the area up through Sokoto and beyond. And we went to Garba Ushishi's. Later that night, the rioting started again, and everybody ran towards the airport. Now, British Petroleum sent a light aircraft to come and get us out of Guzo. There were hundreds of people. As that aircraft was taxiing to take off, the people were literally chasing after this aeroplane. And we were looking at them from the windows, and that has never left me. You know, anyway, we got out from there, and then comes Biafra. I was in CKC in Onitsha when the war started. And one night, we crossed by Kenu to Asaba, and the massacres of Asaba, I told a little bit of a story, I think 2 or 3 nights ago. I was one of those lined up to be shot. I was 12 years old, and the soldiers were fighting over who captured us. And a senior officer called Nathaniel Nasamu stepped in and slapped one of the NGOs that was trying to execute us and had him locked up. And we were taken to St. Patrick's. You heard about St. Patrick's Asaba. And there was a priest who lived in the United States for a latter part of his life. He passed away his name is Osia. Father Osia was the chaplain, and I was a young sacristan back in Uzo. I became he superintended literally that camp for some time. And he's written quite a bit that really is valuable for anybody who wants to do research on what happened. And these soldiers would come at night and want to take girls from the camp. And when they couldn't get away, from Osia's keen watch, they rigged something to kill him one night. But somehow another soldier tipped him off. And part of the story is that they were good guys and bad guys. There were people who tried to prevent some really terrible things from happening during that awful season. But for me, I don't think that there's any getting away from coming to terms with the fact that the Nigerian Civil War was one of the genocides of the 20th century that we tried so hard to cover up. It was an awful. However, I don't think that somebody sat in Lagos and planned ethnic cleansing, perhaps like happened in some parts of Balkan country that we've had to deal with. Another part of my experience was that I saw both parts. I was in Biafra, I experienced Asaba, and towards the end of 1968, I moved. Of course, my father worked for British Petroleum, and so he was in Lagos. Moved back to Lagos, and I started school in Ibadan. The really frightening thing about life after 68 was that in Ibadan, we did not know there was a civil war going on in Nigeria. It was just something we saw on TV. I mean, just in the way we see Boko Haram on TV in Lagos and wonder, what are those crazy people doing in the north? And that is part of a Nigerian tragedy, that there is disconnect from the reality of that country, depending where you are located. I thought I should just probably introduce that as part of my Biafra experience. And we can talk, I particularly want to talk about 50 years of state capture in Nigeria and why Nigeria is the mess that it is. Because really what has happened to Nigeria is that that group of young officers who captured the Nigerian state in July of 1966, as was said a few minutes ago, still run Nigeria. They still have it like this in their hands. We've had 50 years of state capture. And the effect of their complete dominance of Nigeria, the limitations of their culture as a group of people, is what Nigeria continues to suffer through. I'm in the middle of writing a book that's titled 50 Years, working title. Just looking at these 50 years of their dominance. In my view, there are really three groups within the class of capture, as I like to call them. They include a category that I call the modernizer wannabes. And this group within that class of 66 would like to be Suharto, would like to see Nigeria modernized, but they have a tragic character flaw that make them sabotage even their own efforts. That's one group. A second category I often like to refer to as the narcissistic influencers. They're dominated completely by self-love. I want my oil wells. I want to appoint a minister of this or that. As long as I have it, it doesn't matter who in the group is really in charge in Nigeria. But let me just have what I want. The third category I refer to as the entitlement-minded Praetorian Guards. Now, this group believe that they fought the Civil War, they're entitled to Nigeria. It does not matter whether they have a clue what to do with Nigeria, but Nigeria is their entitlement. I can mention some of the generals, but it's not necessary. You can read it when I write the book. But my good fortune is that I know all of them personally. In 1980, 81, I was researching a PhD thesis that enabled me literally interview all of them. And I've maintained some relationship with almost all of them through the years. And I have, enough of what I consider evidence of how they've acted and unwittingly created a country that does not work.
Okay. I'd like to start with what I should say last. This conference is being held by the Igbo Studies Association UK branch. There's also going to be another conference by the Igbo Studies Association USA. That will be held in Owerri, in Nigeria, June 8 to June 10. I'm going to give the keynote address there. So one thing I want to indicate up front is that most of what we're doing here will have to be conveyed there. So many things have been going on in my mind in the past 2 days. We've held this conference. Now, we've been talking about people not being allowed to talk about Biafra, people not being allowed to speak their minds, and by not being allowed, we're talking probably about the federal government. So I want to assure you, and I don't want to say anything here that they will say, oh, well, they went to London and began to abuse us. What I will say it in Nigeria, and I would like Nigerians to hear it. But it's more than that. We blame the federal government. Charity begins at home. I was at a panel this morning where it was said that the Igbo, correctly so, that the Igbo do not celebrate their heroes. Now, those of you who checked on the internet, you may have read 2 days ago that the Anambra State government said they're going to do something about Chinua Achebe 4 years after he had died. We talked about Buchie Mecheta today. When I came back from the United States to Nigeria, I spent 16 years at the University of Calabar. I realized that African writers, 75% of those who were worldwide known are Nigerians. And yet, nobody seemed to recognize that they counted for anything. That was why, in my department at the University of Calabar, English department, we started what we called the International Conference on African Literature and the English Language, where practically every African writer of note at that time was invited to Calabar, and they were there for days. I brought Buchie Mecheta to Nigeria. She stayed in my department for 1 year as part of that, getting people to realize that we have something, we have treasures. Now, Buchie has died, Buchie has been buried. What did Nigeria do? And let's not even ask what did Nigeria do. We have areas in Nigeria that are under the governance of Igbo people. Back home now, I suspect that what they'll be thinking is that, well, this conference has been called by Masab or iPod. That's the way they are looking at it. They wouldn't want to know that this is a conference that actually they should support very strongly. The young lady who, Didi, Uneli, who talked about getting in a piece of land or structure, infrastructure. Why should that be a problem in southeast Nigeria? In Imo State, Anambra State, Enugu State, Ebonyi State, Abia State. So these are some of the soul-searching questions I want to ask them when June comes. And I'm going to ask a number of questions on your behalf. Because they say there's a way a monarch will continue to be doing the wrong thing. You just take a basket, cover your head, and then say straight things to him. Look him in the eye, or look her in the eye, and say some straight things. So I think we should, a number of people, young people here have expressed frustrations. If we just make this a conference where we are talking about these things by ourselves, it wouldn't be to our best interest. We should let these people know, these governors, these politicians, these people who are Igbo people, and who are in Nigeria and in places of authority and importance, but who think that what we are doing here is a waste of time. I mean, look at the number of people who have come here. When we get to Owerri, maybe there'll be one or two governors. I don't think they probably will not come. They'll send somebody who will come in with a siren, and then if the conference is going to begin at 10 o'clock, they'll be there at 11:30. And then we'll spend 30 minutes on protocols, Your Excellency.
I have a perspective on this. I believe that part of the legacy of state capture has been that the class of 66 has been severely anti-intellectual. Actually, they have disrupted culture in a manner in which to think it has been given a bad name. If you think in popular Nigerian culture, go away, that's theory. Intellectuals are people who just are utopians, who don't think of practical things, who can get things done. And to be concerned is to be an activist. And activists are just troublesome people who really don't get things done. So popular Nigerian culture, without realizing it, is anti-people who can actually get things done. After you remove the activists, the intellectuals, what's left are the hustlers. And these are the people that the class of 66 essentially have foisted on Nigerian culture. And they include many of the governors, unfortunately. Yes. I try very hard to work on them. And I'm very pointed. I look them in the face. I tell them. And many of them, I was part of the group that stimulated Ikedi Hakim to bring back Chino Achebe to give their Hajoku lecture. In fact, I gave the lecture introducing the lecturer, the Hajoku tradition, introducing Achebe. And it was a very elaborate operation getting him to come and to do that. It's wonderful. But those kinds of things, they happen just off one here, one there. There isn't a systematic tradition of understanding the import of all of this. Everything is reduced to transactions. That people don't think in terms of a big vision of where society is traveling. And this is part of the heritage of this anti-intellectual tradition.
Well, anti-intellectual tradition, I agree with. But the point is that it's about time we really use the kind of medicine that ignorance hates, and that's imposition of knowledge. We have a situation, yes, where these people don't care about intellectuals, but also we have some intellectuals who have really become part of that anti-intellectualism. So all you need to look at now is what's happening in universities in Igbo land. There used to be a time when the Igbo claimed that education was our number one industry. That's right. That's no longer there. There used to be a time when we'll say, well, what will they do? We have the knowledge. That's no longer there. Because the kind of professors we have in these universities in Igbo land, yes, they will tell you it's all over Nigeria. Yes, does that make any difference? The kind of professors we have, the kind of lecturers we have, the kind of knowledge that they're imparting to our younger generation, it wouldn't take 20 years and we are the most uneducated group in Nigeria if that kind of education continues. I mean, yes, some of our governors are doing well, but Southeast, let me not say Southeast. Let me say in Igbo area, Igbo land, we have not been lucky with effective governors. There may be one or two exceptions. They are fighting each other. They are trying, working on some kind of aggrandizement, self-aggrandizement. And they act as if there's nobody there who understands what they are doing. Yesterday, Charlie Boy said something which really should be taken very seriously. If nothing radical happens in 2019, we're going to come back with the cycle that we have there now. The cycle, people who really, these are people, why are they anti-intellectual? Because they're illiterates themselves. And an illiterate is not just somebody who can't read or write. It's somebody who can't even understand when you say something that's meaningful and reasonable. And there are so many of them occupying our state houses. Now, but it's not enough for us to identify this. A good many of them are hiding now under, Masab and IPOB, even though Wole Soyinka recently said he supports IPOB. But a good many of our own governors are hiding under that shelter, that these are people who don't understand what's going on. Yes. How have you tried to make them understand how to go about it? What's wrong with getting your house in order and making the so-called militant groups the action wing of your own, of whatever you want to do? Yes, sometimes the elders can sit back, inform get the youth properly informed, and let them go and do something. When they come back, remember how Chinua Achebe put it, go there and be our eye and our ears there. If anything is good there, bring back our own portion. But if there's something good there, leave it there. We cannot resolve the Igbo problem. And I'm specifically saying the Igbo problem. I recognize that Biafra, yes, was made up of several entities. And I recognize that we do say marginalization is being overflogged. But until that problem is solved, it will continue to be flogged. I believe that if, and I go back again to the writers, Chinua Achebe, Cyprian Ekwensi, Flora Nwapa, and so on and so forth, many of these writers are of Igbo origin. They've made tremendous contributions. Are these contributions recognized? I mean, somebody, I think it was a professor, one of, who said this morning, Professor Ezip, I believe, in Yoruba area, in Yoruba land, you have the recognitions of their own writers. Wole Soyinka, there's the Ike Festival, and so on and so forth. Now, and this goes on, people come from all over the world. Yet, Anambra had to wait for 4 years before coming up to say they'll do something about Chinua Achebe. What about Cyprian Ekwensi? I mean, this is...
The problem is very simple, and Chinua Achebe identified it, leadership. There's a crisis of leadership.
No, my point is that if whatever they are doing now is 4 years too late.
That's right. It's because there's no leadership.
Right.
That they don't recognize the import of doing that. There's a failure of leadership, which Emechita is actually a cousin of mine. You know, her house is directly opposite my father's house in Ibuzo. We try to rally. Sylvester's still here?
Yes.
Yes. Even before she died, we tried working on things to celebrate her in Nigeria. At the point we recognized that the Delta State government was not going to be very useful, so let's leave the government alone. We have enough of a network to have a high profile. The thing with these people is that when you begin to do something and it's working, they want to jump on the bandwagon. And so the leadership needs to come from outside of them because they don't have the capacity to take initiative. I mean, let's take...
Yeah, part of that, part of what's happening there is actually ignorance. Here you have Uchi Emecheta, not just somebody from the Delta, not just somebody from Nigeria, the most prolific and insightful female writer from Africa of the 20th century. So we don't even need to sell her. But you know, the point is, I remember there was somebody who took a proposal about something about Chinua Achebe a year after he was dead, and he said, "We'll take it to the universities. That's where it should be done." These people don't even recognize, don't even understand, don't even realize that these writers have been the cultural ambassadors for Nigeria, and in fact beyond, for a long, long time. I mean, Chinua Achebe, who deserves to be called Aheji Agambowa, more than Chinua Achebe, more than Cyprian Ekwensi. When Flora Nwapa died in 1993, yes, Abacha was in power at the time, every arrangement had been completed about bringing the cost from Enugu to Owerri and then to Oguta. And then, just as the vehicles left Enugu, by a government order, the multipurpose hall where this event was to take place was locked up. And then soldiers were posted all over the place, policemen. Well, because as far as they were concerned, Flora Nwapa was just Flora Nwapa. It didn't happen there. They wouldn't open it. It doesn't matter who petitioned them. It doesn't matter who appealed to them. So we had to take Flora Nwapa to Ikoku College of Education, where I was the provost, and did everything that we needed to do. But a country where you have the first female black African novelist coming from Nigeria, who opened the gates for so many other writers, who set up a publishing company to encourage other female writers. She died. And the state where she comes from locked up where she was supposed to be, to lie its state. So I would like us to really know that, just as I said yesterday, what Charlie Boy said was really appropriate. We have to know that these people, they don't know, they don't want to know, and they don't care. So what do we do? Just fold our hands or get them to understand that what they don't value is really valued elsewhere in the world.
Yes, we've got to take initiative away from them. One of the big problems with the Nigerian story is that we assume that leaders are people who have titles, governor, minister. They may not be leaders. There's a Canadian writer called Robin Sharma who writes about the leader who had no title. And I think that the sooner we realize that leaders are not necessarily people who have official positions of authority, the better for us. And I want to give an example of something that we've missed that has taken away from getting together the direction of travel in terms of economic emancipation for the part of Nigeria that we're dealing with here. I was one of the founding members of a group called Akai Kenga many, many years ago. And I was chair of the Economic and Finance Committee. About 1996 or thereabouts, we began to make the point that if we leave the development of that part of the world to the governors, no progress will come. And so we put ourselves together to develop a plan that is going to be essentially private sector driven, that will engage diaspora to create a development area that can become the fastest growing developing area in Africa. And we called it the Niger Basin Project. And we developed clusters based on the endowments of different parts. The Abakaliki area would be an agro-industrial cluster, heavy industry cluster, around Nnewi, light manufacturing cluster, around Aba, how privately developed roads, multi-lane highways, and railway lines can link these clusters. An ICT cluster in the Anyoma areas, all linked up. And we thought, let's go out and present this to the world, present it to diaspora, so that people can engage and work this. In 1998, there was the first World Igbo Congress outside of the United States here in London. And that year, the agenda was to present what I had christened the Niger Basin Project, because it would work a nation that recognized that the South-South and Southeast working together created the optimum possibilities for development. And we arrived in London to present this. Ken Ife, at the time, was one of the first people to read it, and he was exclaiming and shouting, what an initiative. And that year, as they say in Nigeria, the whistle was blown for politics. And all the politicians of note in Igbo land descended on that Congress. Alex Ekweme, Jim Wobodo, Athon Zeribe, Iwanyanwu, all of them descended on London. And all that we were hearing, because there was talk of Igbo presidency, that was all the conference succeeded in doing. And the most serious business of how to create opportunities for the people of that area, to create jobs, to open up the place, never got to get on the agenda, which was the primary reason for that World Igbo Congress. The triumph of politics is the death of all of us.
It's not over yet. I just want to give us the opportunity to come into this conversation. And I know everybody's raising hands, but I'll raise mine and I've got the microphone. I'll start with something that's been bothering me. Professor Utomi, as you've said, has been involved in politics, in governance, in management in Nigeria. And he's told us the story about his survival, during Biafra. So the question, I have a double-barreled question. The first one is this. Today's Nigeria, how do you cope as somebody who has identified himself as Igbo in being able to go to all those high tables and converse with people on an equal level? What are the challenges to that? And the second question is this. Anioma, whenever we're talking about Biafra and Igbo land, people start from the Niger and start going east. But there's a huge territory of Igbo people who live in Anioma. And the challenge is, this is what I want to bring to you. When we talk about Igbo people not agreeing, there's actually a bigger one in Anioma. You say to somebody, oh, we are talking about the Asaba massacre. And he says to you, why only Asaba? As the Asaba people, the only Anioma people. What about what happened in Ogwashuku? What happened in Ibuzo? What happened in Ubuluku? So I'd want you to address those two things for us, please.
Well, first of all, the Anioma issue, let's start with that. Sorry, let me start with how do I, as somebody who identifies himself as Igbo, manage to engage in Nigeria? What I found out is that people treat you with the dignity you give yourself. You can sit at table with anybody if you know who you are. A little bit about, when I came back from grad school in 1982, I made a deliberate attempt to get mentored. There are two people, and people have different views about this, that I chose to be my mentors. One was Dr. Pius Okibo, the other was Ajiopa Biaseka. And literally, every day in the evening, I would choose one of the two of them, drive up to their home, start a conversation, and I would get, well, Asika would start from Socrates and end up with Nnamdi Azikiwe. And I used to talk about it as getting free education. It's remarkable education that I got. Of course, my classes at the Lagos Business School are a bit are celebrated because I give examples of how the decision was made when Balewa decided against steel or that, because Pastor Kibu's voice just continuously rings in my head as he talked about these experiences. Now, part of what it helped me do very, very early is that I engaged with who was who. Writing my PhD thesis did not hurt either, because to write my PhD thesis, I met almost all of them, the so-called super permanent secretaries, the Gowons. I came here to London to interview Gowon for my PhD thesis in 1981. He was living in North London here. So I got to know all of them very well. And I am not, I think in an autobiography that I was made to write many, many years ago, I think there's a chapter titled The Courageous Coward. I am not a quote-unquote a brave man, but I never pull punches. I will come at any issue I believe in. I don't believe I can die. Anybody can kill me. And I just keep going. And people think, this madman, just leave him alone. And it enables me to get to anywhere I want to and do what I need to do. Now, on the Anyama question, I think that you're going to have people who respond to, the economists are always talking about incentives. People respond to all kinds of incentives, depending on what their self-worth is. I tell the story of how the selection of an Anioma President General of Ohanese has been the most seamless, the most trouble-free in the history of Ohanese. It was very simply because when it was the Anioma turn, I stepped up and said, I'm going to take care of this. So you're going to take care of this, just leave me to take care of this. And I looked at the picture and I said, you know, the easiest way to make people feel ownership of something is go to the people at the boundaries and make them feel a sense of belonging. And so my first thought was, let me get an Ndokwa person or an Ika person who is at the margin, who the Benis are saying you are Beni or you are Urubo, to be President General of Ohanese and Igbo. That will give people a sense of belonging. And that's a mistake that we make in the Southeast in dealing with the people in rivers and elsewhere, that we have not succeeded in building the kind of. So I listed them. Osifo was my preferred person. Fortunately, looked at his nature, said, okay, maybe. Then I had a list of them, and I walked them one through the other. Then eventually, when Osifo could not do it for some personal reasons, I then decided, okay, it's Uwechwe. And I called him, and he asked me where he was. He was in Abuja. I flew to Abuja, sat with him for hours, and told him why I thought he should be President General of Ohanese and Igbo. He had some doubts because he didn't want to get to the trouble of the kind of fight it usually involves. And I told him, just say yes, and leave the rest to me. And he said yes. And I flew to Asaba, went to the Asaba, and said, I've talked to XYZ, I think we'll settle on Raf Uwechwe. And Asaba said, oh, but Imo Okocha, who's my classmate, had indicated interest. I said, Uluro Ema, I will call him and tell him that it's not, it's not something. And Asaba said, fine. Then Asaba came to Lagos and we called a meeting, and the people agreed it was Raf Uwechwe, and that was it. So you've got to be really systematic about the way you approach these kinds of things. The people who, because states were created during the war, essentially make people feel, okay, you're different from those people. And so people responded to that incentive. It's our duty to offer incentives that are more appealing, and we can create the kind of cohesion that will enable us create what we must create.
Thank you. Thank you for a really interesting conversation. One of the things I wanted to say, I think it was George Orwell who said that if you end up with bad leaders, you're not victims, you're accomplices. Yeah. So I'm really glad that this forum is happening. I think for a long time there's been this sense of victimhood, but I think I would appeal that we, as you say, take the initiative on this. And for me, the key issue is that if you look across Igbo land, there was an attempt at freedom with the Biafra stuff, and you look at it today and you think, was this what the war was about? And did all those people die for Aba to look like it does, for the roads to be as they are, for the bad governance? There's a level at which we do have to take some responsibility. We say we want to run Nigeria on the basis of what? Of Igbo land, good practices speak the loudest volume. So I think there is a real need. I understand all the things that we have been through, but there has to be also this sense of actually being ashamed of what Igbo land looks like. And we need to come to that moment as Igbo people. And until we do that, projecting this onto Nigeria is not going to solve our issues.
Hello, thank you. I just wanted to compound on what Onyekachi said and what Prof said about 4 years later honoring Achebe. I just want to tell everybody that 50 years later, nothing in Anambra State has been done for Christopher Okibo.
Oh, to answer. Well, I thought this essentially.
It's pertinent. The mistake we'll make is just to take what Anambra is offering now for Chinua Achebe, because they'll do it to high heavens and they'll feel they've done everything.
Yeah, because what I wanted to add is that actually for 15 years, since I've had UNESCO has got the plaque and I started the foundation, I've been knocking on doors, all the governors, 15 years for land and for help. Yeah, so like you say, I'm actually ashamed.
Right, let me even tell you something more shocking and embarrassing, really. You know, the original manuscript of Things Fall Apart is lost. What happened was that Chinua Achebe, in his good-naturedness, had lent this only copy to a Francophone scholar, quote, from the Cameroon, who came from Paris to say he was writing a dissertation, PhD dissertation on Chinua Achebe, and he wanted to borrow, the original copy of Things Fall Apart. Chinua Achebe gave it to him. He was to bring it back in a few days' time. 1 week, 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 1 year. And Achebe got worried and they started asking questions. Because the man wasn't even working on a PhD on anything of substance. He took away the manuscript, and frantically everybody was, Chinua Achebe at that time, he had called a number of us saying, do you know anything about this and that? But he lent the manuscript to the man. To cut a long story short, that man died. And then it was said that the manuscript was in his village, in his house in the village. He has a brother who is a lawyer, who was a lawyer at the time. And the idea was, can we take action immediately to go and recover this manuscript in Cameroon? This was happening at the time when Things Fall Apart 50th anniversary was being celebrated. And we appealed to the governor of Anambra State at that time to please sponsor somebody, somebody had from the Cameroons had offered to lead this expedition. Nothing came from Anambra State, nothing came from anywhere. That lawyer, the brother of the person who stole the manuscript, the brother also died. And then it was left with the wife, and the wife is really not a illiterate person by any stretch of imagination. But in any case, till today, that manuscript was not recovered. Elsewhere, it would have been a battle Nigeria could fight, more than, but no, nobody did anything. It was as if nothing really happened. So when Anambra is coming forward now to say we want to do something for 4 years after Chinua Achebe, could somebody have the courage to tell them, start by going to recover that manuscript from the Cameroons? Right, so that's the point of what I'm saying now is that following what Begine had mentioned, the diaspora, those of us who are here now, it's about time we will also begin to take active part in whatever action we want taken at home. Otherwise, this cycle will continue. I mean, so it's not enough to say, thank you for doing this thing for Chinua Achebe. It's something that is a position that perhaps an organization like this could really respond to and say that there are also other challenges. There are also other things that you've neglected to do. And maybe this is the time to start doing something.
My bosses said there's only time for one last question.
Okay, this question is to Professor Pat Utomi. In the 1980s, you said that you had a chance to talk or interview with the hustlers of the class of 1966. Now, did you call them out when you were interviewing them, or did you try and influence correct behavior? And if so, did they listen to anything you said? That's number one. Number two, there's a phrase, I don't speak Igbo unfortunately, but it's this, the Igbo has no king, and we have that in the UK, where we have so many people that purport to be the leaders of the Igbo community. Do you think we, as in the UK, would be better served just being under one umbrella, so we could just have a king, basically, so we could just have one umbrella? And the final question I've been asked is, what do you think the prospects are for the future of Igbo in Nigeria?
Okay, well, first of all, when I interviewed these gentlemen, it was not an interview for the purpose of counseling. I was a PhD student writing on the making of economic policy in Nigeria between 1960 and 1981. And I wanted to look at the interaction in the policy process. And so I just asked them specific questions to higher bureaucracy and public policy. So, but I got to know them well then. In fact, this thesis of state capture and the groups only began to fully crystallize in my thinking in the last 2 years. I saw more clearly as, especially as I saw Buhari act out after quite a bit of interaction over the last 4 or 5 years, then it just struck me what the dynamics of the relationship within that group was. About the Igbo community in London or in the UK, I think that there tends to be a proliferation of groups. And this is because of this obsession with who is in charge, who has power, if people concentrate on doing rather than taking glory, we will not have all of these organizations. And I think that people should really begin to ask themselves, what impact am I making as an individual? If we concentrate on impact, we won't be looking for the position. There's too much. I mean, one of the things that I think the Civil War did to Igbo contemporary psyche and culture, I gave the example a few days ago somewhere, I don't remember where now. Before the war, the Igbo man was the most modest of people. You see an Igbo man going around with bathroom slippers. If you knock him down, you go to his bank account, you see £1 million. Today, he gets 10,000 naira, and all kinds of. I think that we should also look down on people who do those things, because they take themselves too seriously. So people are out chasing all kinds of titles and therefore creating groups so that they will be connected. Yes.
They want to get connected to the governance. They just money. That's all they're doing here.
So.
What about the issue of republicanism and having the king?
Having no king. Oh yeah, that's part of the point. I mean, when did the Igbos become the people of kings all over the place? I think that this is, again, my small thesis around this is that during the war, if you were running from one place you are running from Iguoma to Ihiala or somewhere, when you get to your new destination, you needed the most fungible asset to survive. And the most fungible asset there is money. And somehow the worship of money took on. And that damaged Igbo culture. And the literati, the writers, and all of the people who can affect culture need to begin to make a joke of people who are celebrated because of the size of their bank accounts. And that's the only way we can rescue Igbo land, really.
Okay. Quick, first of all, comment about the arrogance you talked about. I think it's a major problem that's increasing. If we just look at the fascination with titles, you know, someone is, Prince, Chief, Prophet. Philip Effion, PhD, MSc,
UTC, APC.
So I think it's a big problem. The other thing is, I think there was a certain conversation about not honoring who should be honored and taking responsibility. And it's a pity backing off of you, there's a word like that. Or I'm taking my cue from you. And this is not something I know much about, and I would appreciate, maybe there needs to be some more information. Not too long ago, I started learning about the veterans, Biafra veterans in Oji River. These people are not in Kaduna, they are not in Sokoto, they are the heartland of what used to be Biafra. Is it true that they're being, that they've been abandoned the way people say? If it is, well, shame on us. The other thing is, we've talked about how a conference like this can be used for practical purposes. I think that's one area that we can revisit. And it's not too late. It's been a long time, but it's not too late. So we can do something for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think your point about titles, let's face it, even academics are guilty. I'm embarrassed when people introduce themselves as Professor so and so and so. You are Pat Utomi, and that's how I always introduce myself. I am Pat Utomi. I'm not Professor Pat Utomi. Somebody else can choose to call you Professor Pat Utomi, but you are not introducing yourself as Professor Pat Utomi. And I don't know what has gone wrong with our sense of self-worth, because what he says to me is that you are worth nothing but for that title. Right. And so we need to begin to correct these things. I think that, again, how we honor people in Nigeria matters. I started a center called the Center for Values in Leadership. And one of the things that we've tried to do is find people who are worthy of being honored, and we honor them. Not those who have money to give. All these awards, these things are sold, and they go every day. The most useless governors in the country get the Man of the Year award every week. But we go for, who were the last 2 or 3 with Professor Akimabu Gunje? I know who was the last. We have the next one coming up. Where you've done Anya, we've done. So we look for people who really, but that's again the thing. We wait for government to do many things. We wait for government to do the ultimate tribute to Chris Okibo. It is civil society that should move society. We should organize, we should make these things happen. Intelligent people in the private sector and in the public sector who recognize that this is value and come in somehow to engage. But we need to have a more active civil society that tries essentially to raise the values that will get society in direction.
What I want to add,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, what I want to add there is the fact that it all hinges back, it all goes back to the issue of leadership. Because we can come up with all this agenda, but if these people who have been misruling us, who've been misdirecting us, still remain in charge, then we're not going to make any impact. Right. So I think it's important that as we discuss these things and take them very seriously, we also look for how to get down to the grassroots, how to get these ideas there for workable purposes.